Slimehouse TV, myself, Theo Kane, hold tight everybody that's locked in, the Slime Alliance, the Slime Renegades, Team Z, and everyone else that's supporting. So for today's video, I kinda need to give you a recap to an episode that I dropped like a month or so ago, when I went out to Smith's and I picked up a reduced McFarlane Avatar Mechsuit from the new Shape of Water movie. Now, although the paint job on it was cool, I always knew that I was going to repaint mine myself if I picked one up. Add a little bit of rust, add a bit of weathering, just make it look a bit more realistic. But after thinking about it more and more, I decided that not only would I do a little bit more than that, but it'd also be cool to open up an invitation to anybody else that wanted to buy one and customise it, and together we could all create our own amp suits in our own way, and I'd just do a little showcase video on here or over on my Instagram. Now, like I said, this was a month or so ago, and I planned on this being a video with a much shorter turnaround, but like most things that I create, it ended up taking a lot longer than I anticipated it would. However, I'm now happy to announce that mine is finished. So in today's episode, I'm going to show you my finished mech suit and the process of how I created it. I'm also going to show you everyone else's that took part in the challenge, which I'm buzzing for you to see because there's some really good ones. So yeah, fun little episode today, if I do say so myself, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, let's do this. So the biggest issue that I had with this custom project right from the start was just trying to decide what direction that I would go in with it, what kind of vibe, what kind of aesthetic. There's so many different genres that you could play with when you're doing something like this, and different looks and styles, so the hardest thing for me right off the bat was just trying to focus in on one theme and then running with that. When I first picked it up, I thought maybe I'll just give it a bit of a repaint, so stick to the original Avatar paint job and just make it a little bit more realistic and lived in, add a little bit of weathering, etc. Just make it look like an actual miniature movie prop. But then the more that I thought about it, the more that I wanted to do something different. I started looking at the potential for adding new elements to it and modifying certain parts, looking at which bits I would keep and which sections of it I would try and remove and replace. For example, one of his hands pops off, so I thought maybe I could replace that with a claw or a drill or a saw or a plasma welder or something along them lines. I'm also not into these big shovel looking feet that he's got, so I thought they'd look much better replaced with something more chunky. Also, these shoulder sections are dying to have stuff added to them, cannons or spotlights or something like that. These suits also fit 3.75 figures perfectly, which is great if you love 3 3/4, but for someone like me, who's much more of a 6-inch figure kind of guy, I also wanted to see if there was anything that I could do to make it fit more in line with the scale of the diorama that I'd recently built. So there was definitely lots to think about before I started attacking this thing. Speaking of that diorama that I built as well, I ended up with loads of boxes like this, just full of little bits and bobs and greeblies, all stuff that I thought would no doubt come in handy when customising a mech suit. So the first thing that I had to do was take it all to pieces. I planned on spraying the entire toy a completely different colour, but also because I wanted to retain a bit of its articulation, I wanted to make sure that I could keep the ball joints and those kind of pieces separate and unpainted. This was so that when it came to putting it back together, I wouldn't have bits of paint flaking off and getting trapped in areas where the joints were going to be moving. That was my plan, at least, anyway. In my experience, I'm always a lot better at taking things apart than I am at putting them back together. Definitely more of a breaker than a fixer, so I was trying to be very careful not to lose any screws or forget how certain parts of it fitted back together. And I know this is just a kid's toy, but I've taken Nerf guns to pieces in the past and then failed trying to put them back together with the mechanisms working and stuff, so this is literally just me recognising my weaknesses and being very mindful of them. Now this little chair with a gas mask strapped to the back of it looked pretty cool, but it's again 3 3/4 size, and I wanted to make this thing look like it fit bigger action figures, so I knew that I was going to have to cut it out and replace it with something more in scale later on, which was a shame because it's pretty cool looking, but stuff like this is just all part of the customising process. So the next step now is to get it outside and start priming it up and giving it a couple of coats of spray paint. By this point as well, I had a colour scheme in mind, something very specific that I'll talk about later on in the video, but it basically meant that I had to change the entire colour of this whole thing from khaki military green to pure white. Okay, so yeah, that looks like ass. Basically, I didn't have any of the usual Warhammer or Army Painter white that I like to use, so I tried this white surface primer from Wilkinson's, and it turned out looking terrible. It wasn't matte like it said on the tin, it came out a lot more silky looking. Also, paint that I normally use dries in about an hour, but this one takes 24 hours, and I didn't know that because I didn't read the can, so when I picked it up I got my thumbprints all over it. I then tried to rectify it with some dry brushing on top of everything, and it all just turned out looking like garbage, so I had to go all the way back to the drawing board and start all over again. I got everything in the sonic cleaner, purged all the paint off as much as I could, gave it a real good scrub, and this is a method that I've documented on this channel before. Some people don't agree with it, they said that you shouldn't be putting methylated spirits in your sonic cleaner and that kind of thing. That's just what I do, don't try this at home. This is not a tutorial channel or anything like that, I'm just doing what works for me, and to be honest, I was so pissed off at this point that I would have used anything to get the paint off this thing. Now, as you can see, it's worked very good. To say that I covered this whole thing with multiple layers of shiny spray paint, it's worked wonders on it. Obviously, there's a little bit of white remaining, and if I really wanted to, I could have spent a whole day doing this process over and over and getting most of it off, but it really wasn't necessary, and I'd already wasted enough time starting from scratch all over again. So I was pretty happy with this result, to say how bad it was, and you can understand why I use this method even when some people tell me that it's dangerous, because it's so quick and effective. But like I said, don't try it at home. If I ever get hurt because I'm an impatient bastard, then that's on me, that's my fault. So then I went and did something that I probably should have done from the start. I went out and picked up some Warhammer spray paint. One that actually works and doesn't cover my model in slow drying, gunky, shiny Wilkinson shit. And while I was grabbing it, I also picked up some other bits that I thought might help with the build as well. Now, if I've learned anything from Toypaloy, it's that Lego can be used for most things when it comes to toys. So I picked up a couple of these knockoff Lego sets from Poundland, because I thought at £1 each they've got to come in handy for something. I also picked up some plumbing pipes and some other little bits that I planned on using to bulk out the waist a bit more and make it look like it could actually house larger scale figures. I wasn't 100% on how I was going to do this or anything, but I just grabbed them anyway just in case. And I'd also been sorting through lots of boxes of random bits and had put together a bag of stuff that I thought might come in handy for greeblies. Greeblies is another name for little bits and pieces that you stick on junk models so that the surfaces don't look bare. Basically, when you're building something like this and it looks a bit plain, just stick some greeblies on it. My girl Roxy is also always vaping, so she gives me all of her coils and tanks and juice bottles when they're burnt out or they're used up and stuff. So I'd also saved a bunch of them for a project like this as well, because I always thought that they looked interesting and this seemed like the perfect time to use them. Now, the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to try and fix this scale issue. And I figured that looking back, it was probably a good idea to do this before I prematurely sprayed it again. The way that the waist was currently was when I stood a 6-inch figure next to it, it didn't look like it had a big enough core area to house the character's legs. So to fix that, I was going to have to extend the torso of the mech and then build around it to make it look thicker. I also didn't want to just 3D sculpt and print a whole new torso for it, because then you start getting into the territory of it not even being the same figure anymore. So I was conscious that I didn't want to do too much 3D printing with this thing and not use that as a crutch, and it'd be much better to try and do the majority of it all from junk modelling and building on top of what I already had. So with a bit of rejigging and cutting and stacking random bits of circular plastic and metal washers on top of each other and screwing a bolt through all of it, I managed to get it all to fit together and stand up pretty straight and sturdy. I also managed to even keep the swivel motion too, which was cool because, like I said right from the start, I wanted to at least try and retain a bit of its articulation and posability. At this point as well, I was also playing with the idea of having its legs bent back on themselves like an ATST Walker or an Ed 209 from Robocop. So I was still very much in the prototype stages, but it was now definitely starting to at least feel like it was in the right scale and definitely heading in the right direction. Now that I knew it was all going to work, I took it outside and gave it a respray with the Warhammer paint, and as you can see, the results are like night and day. It also gave it a proper nice matte finish, it's not clogged up or messy or anything like that. So after I'd given it all a couple of coats of spray paint, it was time to start assembling it all together. I started off by bunging a little bit of milliput into all the open areas to make sure it all felt nice and secure and there were no parts of it rattling around. Obviously what I've done here isn't supposed to fit, I've had to make it fit, so you're always going to get little bits that don't quite lock together perfectly. And I'd also made sure that the bolt was really tight inside it and then glued the locking nut in place after with super glue so that it wouldn't come undone, and once it had all dried it all felt like one proper solid unit. The other thing that were bugging me is that once I'd extended the mech's core, its arms looked a bit too high, a little bit goofy and out of proportion, so to fix them I dropped them down a little bit. Now I didn't capture any of this on camera, it was just a case of me drilling new holes and screwing the arms straight into the body a bit further down. It was a pretty crude way of doing it, but it was done in a way that I'd be able to hide the damage later on when I did the final pass on it, so I wasn't worried. And even though I wasn't 100% happy with it at this point, its arms definitely looked a lot less weird than they did before I moved them. I'd also now decided to do away with the inverted legs idea. I thought it's probably better just to keep them the way that they were initially intended. It also seemed to stand a lot prouder that way and overall just looked a lot better proportioned. The only thing left to do from there in terms of making its whole silhouette and outline look a lot more of the part was build its shoulders up a bit higher just to make it look a bit more balanced. Now, like I said earlier, I've got boxes of random bits and broken toys. Doing shit like this turns you into a real hoarder. You never really want to throw anything away in case you end up needing it one day, and projects like this are a solid example of that. Now, I thought it'd be quite cool to give it two separate shaped shoulder pads, as though each one has a different function. I also couldn't find two suitable pieces of shoulder pauldron shaped plastic that were the same either, so I didn't really have much choice. So I took some pieces from a box of old broken Transformers and GoBots bits that I've got, cut one of them down a bit with the Dremel and warped it slightly with a heat gun to make it fit better. And it actually slotted in pretty bang on, which I was very happy with as it looked apart and was also a perfect platform to fit the stand on for this harpoon cannon that I'd made off camera. Now, because I had fitted a harpoon, I also wanted to include some kind of air compressor to power it. From what I understand, a regular harpoon in the real world is powered by an explosive charge, but I wanted mine to be fired with compressed air, and it was also a good excuse for me to use this tank that my girl had given me off of a broken vape machine. I also liked how it had this dirty looking liquid trapped inside it. When I use my airbrush, there's a little glass filter that collects all the shit in the bottom, so I figured this mechanism would also work very similar, just on a much larger and more powerful scale. I'd also got rid of the bullet belt that the amp suit had, so the slot where that used to fit was also perfectly shaped for a modified piece of that bootleg Lego to slot inside it. That created a nice little fitting for the air canister to stand on, and from there it all connected together pretty effortlessly. I wanted the harpoon to be attached to a big chain on a winch mechanism, so again, I just built one out of junk and housed it up inside the right shoulder. Then I fed a piece of this thin craft chain through a little slot that was already in the plastic, again just making it look functional and like something that could actually work. You might also have noticed that I completely removed the faceplate. That's because the style of mech suit that I wanted to go for here would be much better suited to a roll cage. I always think that roll cages look cool as well, and I'd never built one before, so this was a really good excuse to create one. Now, this was actually made very crudely. Again, I didn't film any of this because it was all a bit fiddly and I wasn't sure if it was even going to work, but I basically took a bunch of kebab skewers, measured them out, cut them down, and after trying a few different arrangements until I found one that looked okay, I glued them together using baking soda to act as a weld to keep everything in place. Then over several days, I just sprayed them over and over, like 10 times with filler primer and thick red gloss spray paint, just giving them tons of coats. This is again something that I could have probably done much easier just in 3D and printed it out, but creating it from scratch out of skewers was a lot more satisfying, and it honestly turned out to be one of my favourite parts of the whole build. So now feels like a good time to talk about my thought process behind this build, why it's got a harpoon and why it looks the way that it does. So in true Bill making stuff storytime fashion, shouts to Bill, I'm going to give you a little bit of this creation's backstory. Now, because these amp suits are military looking, I wanted to do something quite different with mine and change it from something that was made to fight and kill stuff into something that was a lot more utilitarian. So in the imaginary world where this mech suit exists, I imagine it's something that came off a production line years ago, and were the types of units that were built and sold to be used in warehouses or factories or construction sites, just like a general maintenance vehicle that could be modified in different ways depending on what your company needed it for. These things worked quicker and more efficiently than any digger, they could get into places that a forklift and a crane couldn't, and were just a good general vehicle to have around any industrial workplace. But after years of being used, and after too many repairs, like most construction equipment, it eventually got replaced with a newer model, and this one ended up being sold off on the second-hand market. It got bought and sold a few times, the keys that power it up passed through quite a few hands actually, and at one point it was even bought by a team of private contractors that specialised in wreckage excavation. Now this was a really interesting company that got hired to explore shipwrecks, discarded military vehicles, and sometimes even the odd off-world spacecraft. And they'd go exploring all over the world and retrieve goods and cargo and artifacts and information. That's why it got fitted with this big harpoon and a winch, as it was perfect for firing into the sides of abandoned hovering space vehicles that were stuck in the air and pulling them down to ground level. So it's safe to say that this is a vehicle that's seen a lot of stuff over the years. It's worked in many different sectors, and although it might be an older model now, it's still very much a classic, and most people that have worked in any kind of construction or recycling industry have driven or worked with one of these at some point. Unfortunately, it's now been a few years since anybody's had any use for this one in particular. Nobody could tell you when it was last serviced or when it was last taken out on a job, and with it being stood stationary for so many years, a lot of its parts have started to corrode and rust and oxidise. There was once a time when this thing was out being driven every single day, but now it just stands in the back of an old dusty warehouse long forgotten about, just waiting for someone to come along and discover it and find a good use for it again. Now before I do the final reveal of my mech suit that I created, I wanted to show off everybody else's that took part in the challenge. When I first decided to do this, I didn't even know if anyone else would want to get involved. It takes a lot of effort to actually go out your way to buy one of these things and then start thinking of an idea to customize it that's unique and buy all the stuff to do it and that kind of thing. And I really wasn't sure how many people would want to get involved with it. But the amount of people that did get involved with it was like overwhelming. I was really pleased, and the fact that everybody had such a unique take on it and really got involved and threw themselves into it, like, really did make me feel something. We had people involved that had been crafting for years and doing custom toys and stuff like that. We also had people getting involved that had never done anything like this before, and it was really cool seeing everybody's different interpretation of that book, all creating their own version of it. Although I'm showing some photos of them now, I'm also going to be posting them all on my Instagram tomorrow, including the winner of the challenge, so I'll be announcing that there as well. So if you're not already, make sure you head over to my Instagram at Theo_Kane_Slimehouse and follow me on there, because like I said, I'm going to be dropping all these photos on there as well as more photos, and also announcing the winner of the challenge as well. So if you've been following this that we've been doing, then you're not obviously going to want to miss that. So now that you've seen a bunch of other entries in the challenge, it's now time for you to see my entry into the challenge. My mech suit, my own finished version that I did. One that took me way longer than I anticipated, like I said, but ended up being one that I'm actually quite happy with, surprisingly. So yeah, here we go. Hope you like it. So there it is, my finished Avatar Amp Suit Custom. I really wanted to try and do something that in terms of style felt very removed from what it originally was, but was also still kinda recognisable as an Avatar amp suit, if that makes sense. Also, by making it a maintenance unit, it allowed me to have all these exposed wires and pipes and the open front, all stuff that you'd never normally get on a military vehicle. And as you can see, I did also manage to make a chair that was a bit bigger. As I said, I wanted to make this thing look like it could fit larger scale figures than 3 3/4, so this was just a case of sculpting a new one in 3D that was a very specific shape because it had to fit in a pretty tight space and printing it out, but it turned out pretty good, I reckon, and it really looks like it's supposed to be there. I also sculpted and 3D printed these spotlights for the top, which I really liked, and designed in a way that you could fit these little craft stick-on decorative jewels inside, just to make them look that bit more realistic. Now, this was an idea that I literally had yesterday before I filmed these final shots, so I had to run to the retail park to try and find some last minute, and luckily B&M bargains came through, so I was buzzing, as I really do think they work perfect. I also added another winch onto the front. Again, this was just a bit of 3D printing and junk modelling, and I think by having this on the front and the spotlights makes it feel a bit more like a truck or a Land Rover, as well as a Mechsuit, so just again making it feel like it's something utilitarian. I also moved its knife down onto its leg, as I did like where it used to be, but it kind of interfered with the winch and the wires that I'd added, so it made sense to move it. And I wanted to keep the knife because I thought a big knife is a perfect tool for prizing open car doors and cutting through nets and rigging, again just making it feel like a unit that was used for vehicle recovery and shipwreck excavation. In the end, I didn't change its feet either, or its hand. I ended up not minding the feet once I'd painted them, and just run out of time when it come to creating a new hand for it, so maybe that's something that I'll do in the future, who knows. Also, just talking a bit about the paint job, I went for white, red and black, which as you can see took a bit of masking, but it was definitely worth it. This colour scheme is also actually a nod to my favourite ever mech movie, a 1989 classic called Robot Jox, which if you haven't seen then I would definitely recommend because it's absolutely fire. I've also been wanting to do some kind of nod or homage to Robot Jox for a while, so this was a great way of doing that, and I think it's a colour scheme that just really worked perfect for this custom. In terms of the weathering though, I did feel like I went a little bit overboard with the rust, but it's just so fun to do and it's also a great way of covering up any mistakes that you make as well. And I suppose with the storyline that I thought up for it, with it now sitting in a warehouse and waiting for somebody to come and find it, it seemed very fitting. So yeah, overall, even though it's a project that took way longer than I wanted it to, and it stressed me out way more than it should have, it's one that I'm now actually pretty happy with. It's a build that allowed me to test myself, try out new ideas on, use up some of the junk that I've been hoarding, but more importantly, it's one that I had a lot of fun making, and I hope you enjoyed watching me make it too. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and binge the back catalogue. I would love to know your thoughts on my Mechsuit and the others that you saw entered into the competition today, and if you didn't take part but you now kind of wish that you did, what would you have done? What would have been your idea for your custom amp suit? I'd also love to know if you've got any other ideas for future challenges like this, if we can do any more with a theme. Maybe we'll do one once a year, once every 6 months or anything like that. If people are willing to get involved, then I'm more than up for doing them. So yeah, if you've got any ideas for future art challenges, let me know in the comments below because I'd love to hear them. If this is your first time checking out the channel, I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV. I do videos every single week, craft videos, toy documentaries, toy hunting, anything like that. So if you like a bit of that, then again, make sure you subscribe to the channel and binge the back catalogue, because if you enjoyed this video, chances are you enjoyed the other stuff that we do on this channel as well. If you want to help support future projects, whether it's stuff like this or art and about videos and all the other stuff that I do on Slimehouse, then you can head over to patreon.com/SlimehouseTV. There's a couple of tiers on there, including getting behind the scenes access to videos like this and the other stuff that I do as well. If you want to help support but you don't want to sign up to anything, then there's a PayPal donate button down in the description below where you can send a little something. All the money really does help and all goes straight back into Slimehouse and help funding future projects. So yeah, really do appreciate the donations as well. And if you want to help support but you can't help us financially, then just share this video around anyone else that might dig it, anybody else that's into crafting, anybody else that's into toy reviews or custom toys or anything like that. Share it in your favourite Facebook group. Sharing is caring. It all really does help, and it all helps these videos get pushed into the algorithm and helps make Slimehouse bigger and better than ever. I want to say a massive shouts again to everybody that got involved in this challenge. If you want to see better photos of their stuff, like I said, I'm going to drop them tomorrow over on my Instagram at Theo_Kane_Slimehouse. There were some incredible ones and I really want you to see them, show them love, and go and follow everybody else that got involved in this as well, because they all put in so much effort and they really do deserve it. So, I really do hope you enjoyed this video today. Like I said, if this is your first time on the channel, my name's Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, and I will look forward to catching you in the next video, whether it's a toy hunt or a documentary or a crafting video or anything like that. It's always cool stuff here on Slimehouse TV, if I do say so myself. So until that next video, I'm gone. Pow!